in again, my children! Now what would a celebration of Longbox's 10th anniversary be without a return to the finest in illustrated horror? Let us dive into the second issue of Creepy. 48 pages of blood-soaked terror in this one. And we start things off with human nature. Walter here has a unique gift. He has the ability to read people's souls. He can see brief glimpses of their history, the true people they are. He sees the school teacher who is also a prostitute, the lonely woman who has never worked a day in her life, the man who used to be a rebellious youth but has sold out to the drudgery of the world. But then he spots a young man, Jimmy, who he can't really get a read on. He senses bitterness, but that ultimately he's a good kid underneath. He approaches him and offers him $150 to just talk to him, do an experiment in human nature. Jimmy agrees and they go back to his apartment. Jimmy starts to strip, assuming he wanted to hire him as a prostitute, but Walter denies that. When Jimmy gets angry and demands $1,000 up front, Walter sighs and shoots Jimmy dead, saying that he was wrong about him, just like all the others he's killed so far and shoved in a closet. I feel like if you have that terrible a success rate, that perhaps you're not as good at this soul reading thing as you think you are. Next up is Muscle Car. In the not too distant future, gas prices have soared and gas scarcity is an even bigger issue. Alternative fuels were tried, but they just didn't quite work out. But then a mechanic in Oklahoma got an idea. If a man can eat meat, why can't the machine too? Why can't he build an engine that runs on decomposing bodies? Hell, it even lays down organic fertilizer as exhaust. He sold the idea to Universal Motors for $1 billion, and thus was presented the Carnivore, the car that runs on animal matter. Deer hit and slaughtered to be consumed by the cars, roadkill replacing gas stations, and for a pair of bank robbers named Perry and Scylla, they steal a carnivore to go on a crime spree. While fleeing from the police, they run out of fuel, not even able to scrape any meat out of a corpse pecked at by buzzards. Both Perry and Scylla plan to kill the other to fuel the vehicle, but Scylla succeeds, killing her partner and making it farther. But still not enough. And thus she finally arrives in a town for service, having sacrificed some meat off herself for the job. Personally, I'm actually against his car, but only because I fear a meat shortage, and I kind of need to keep eating human flesh to remain undead and not all dead. From there we have Drawn Out. A man discovers that his wife has been cheating on him with his best friend. He tricks his wife into committing suicide, then murders his friend, torturing him first because he wants to draw it out as long as possible. Still, he never wants to risk going to prison, so decides to take his own life by jumping off a bridge. But apparently misjudged the spot he chose to jump on, thinking that the dark ground was water, instead just paralyzing himself while remaining alive. Some bums come along and steal his clothes and wallet, deciding not to put him out of his misery. And yes, he is still conscious during this, as ants try to devour his flesh, as water gets rid of the ants, but draws in some dogs that decide to devour him. And just as his sense of feeling was beginning to return. Oh, what a shame that he can feel all that pain suddenly, but still cannot scream. It's called Drawn Out, but personally I'd love to see even more. Last year we got to read the very first issue of Modern Creepy, and it's time to continue its very first tale. The Curse. In that, Jude learned that he had the power to make people do as he said, but this addictive power usually resulted in people being scarred or killed. He goes to his friend Toby to tell him about this, but Toby assumes he's crazy, especially when Jude mentions his mother, whom the two had apparently killed weeks ago. After making Toby kill himself because he threatened Jude, our hero realizes that his mother had just been trying to protect him with her own power, even after her death. Still, he has this power, and he decides to use it for other people. The power letting them experience doing horrible things without actually doing them and paying him for the job. An executive hires Jude to let him live a fantasy where he murders his annoying family, but Jude claims that he actually did the deed, and then makes him imagine the police closing in on him, so he takes his own life. And as the real family does indeed return home, Jude walks out to have his story concluded in another issue of Creepy. Personally, I'm still failing to see how this is a curse. People get killed, some people get to live a fantasy without actually doing horrible things. It's basically win-win. And finally, we have a classic creepy tale reprinted. The Shadow of the Axe. An 8-year-old boy in the 1800s is disturbed by something that happened to him one night, spotting the shadow of his father passing by his bedroom, lit by lamplight. Said shadow was holding a bloody axe. His mother didn't seem to pay much mind to any of this, seeming to be more withdrawn as of late, and his father scarcely seen during the day, and usually always carrying that axe. Curious about him going into a locked trunk one day, the boy discovers human body parts inside of it. Realizing that his father was an axe murderer who had been killing people nearby, the boy takes it upon himself to do something about it, chopping off his father's head and then returning to bed. The next morning, the police are summoned and assume he is but another victim of the axe murderer. But his mother knows, and she just smiles and winks at him. I just love it when there's a heartwarming family story here. And it ends in decapitation!
Telling ghost stories around a campfire like this has its origins in the 1800s, with frontiersmen and military encampments in particular. People who had to be awake at night would sit around the campfire and tell stories to keep each other awake. But of course, oral storytelling goes back much farther than that. That just shows how the idea of the storyteller is so important to us as a species. We tell stories to each other to pass on lessons, history, and hope for tomorrow. And in ancient times, there was one storyteller in particular of note. What people were his own is now lost to time. All of that belongs to a story of his that he refuses to tell. But telling stories was his pastime and profession, and he specialized in a particular breed of stories. Thrillers, chillers, horrors. Tales of demons that tricked people into doing wicked things. Stories of the dead crawling out of their graves to enact revenge on the living. Recountings of all-too-living monsters that murdered for petty, all-too-human reasons. Sometimes his stories were welcomed, but among the jaded adults of the tribe, they grew weary of dark stories and wanted more uplifting ones. To the children, though, they always loved to hear about such things. It was exciting and scary, and children love to be excited and scared. Time passed and the tribe died out, but the storyteller endured. Some say it's the same man, ageless, from a trick he played on one of those demons in his stories. Some say he is the undead, and his tales are a form of revenge on the living. And yet some say that he is a living monster. But his all-too-human reason for going on is simple. Because humans tell stories, and he's going to keep telling them.